Now, Richard, thank you very much for joining me today. My first question to you is, when we talk about energy transition, we mostly look at it through the climate lens. While critical, we sometimes forget that for billions of people around the world, it is about being able to access energy for all, right? Shouldn't African countries continue to invest in fossil fuel to ensure that the energy access gap is addressed?
Thank you for this amazing question. And to everybody who is listening, let me start with this African proverb. At the table, a good father serves his children first. And this proverb underscores the essence of just transition, which we've heard from the first panelist, achieving equity and justice in transitioning economies to the low emissions development pathway. And in no continent are the principles of this just transition more important than in the African continent. And just about 39 days ago, the IPCC Seed Assessment Report underscored that the globe is on its way to bridge the 1.5 warming in just 2 decades, and for which Africa is already heating up faster than the rest of the world twice. And this is only resulting to the escalation of socio-economic misery, where we have 257 million people going to bed hungry. We have 12 million young people who need jobs every year amidst shrinking economies. And there are up to 60 million children that are malnourished, amongst many more. With all these, the energy gap stands as one of the drivers of this socio-economic vulnerability. We're talking about 580 to 620 million people who lack access to electricity. To bridge the gap, fossil fuel-based high-emitting measures such as generator-based power are used, costing 3 to 6 times what grid consumers pay across the entire globe, denying enterprises in the region the ability to compete, the ability to generate income, and power populations out of vulnerability. But electricity is not the only energy gap. The number of people without access to clean cooking has been rising. As a result, over 490,000 premature deaths occur in the continent every year as a result of indoor pollution. We heard from Dr. Young speak about this. But justly bridging this gap stands as one of the most promising pillars of Africa, and how we can make this pillar a reality for the prioritization to be able to drive transformational change in the continent is key. And the first point is that we must appreciate that carbon finance is necessary, as we've heard, but alone, it's not a panacea. About 83% of Africa indices make some carbon pricing references. And actually, this includes carbon tax, it includes international market mechanism. We've heard about this. And 7 on addressing fossil fuel subsidies, but only one country. We've heard South Africa has a carbon tax implemented. So what's the point here? What I'm saying is most countries are positioning themselves as sellers of carbon credits, with 14 NDCs referencing the clean development mechanism. However, the continent lags behind the CDM pipeline of projects and holds only an estimated 2% of the global share. But when it comes to project financing, carbon credit revenues account for just about 20%. This means that CDM projects must be financially viable investments. First, they can generate dividends even without any carbon-specific revenues, in which case carbon revenue only comes to top up to enhance the potential returns on investments and attract more investment. So a critical way this financial viability can be generated is to target energy projects suited to bridge the energy divide while catalyzing the good of enterprises. Therefore, the bottom line is that carbon pricing instruments in Africa energy will work best if the clean energy initiatives are first financially viable. And that takes me to the second point, which is how do we achieve financial viability? Financial viability requires that energy investment be tapped as enablers of accelerated socio-economic transformation. Efforts to bridge the continent's energy divide must go beyond powering households alone and prioritize powering value addition in inclusive sectors that engage the majority to maximize income and enterprise growth. For example, as we're speaking today, the continent loses up to 48 billion US dollars each and every year worth of food. The entire agro value chain, because of inefficiency in the agro value chain, leveraging off-grid solar solutions decentralized to high potential agro production areas directly imply creating 48 billion worth of income and enterprise opportunities to transition the majority into low emissions pathway justly. And with enterprise growth will come purchasing power to accompany energy demand, which will ensure a healthy return on investment of such projects beyond generic, non-targeted investments that only look at powering households alone. That takes me to a third point. You can only compete from a position of strength. Africa's youth are Africa's powerhouse, and prioritizing youth skills retooling for non-capital intensive energy solutions, especially in clean cooking, is important. Over 60% of Africa's population is useful, that we know, and also constitutes 60% of the unemployed. How this youth can be turned from job seekers to opportunity creators while justly transitioning communities is an area that needs to be tapped, and this is where skill retooling comes in. Over 80% of households in the continent, we know this, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, rely on wood-based energy, indicating significant market demand. Creating alternative, viable, more competitive clean cooking solutions directly taps into over 20 billion annually expended on charcoal and wood fuel while saving forests and enhancing health by minimizing indoor pollution. These are simple, accessible solutions like waste recovery to fuel briquettes, which combined with clean burning cook stoves have been shown to serve an average household in Africa nearly 3 times more than using ordinary charcoal. And that takes me to a last point, which is targeted policy incentives that make solutions more affordable to the consumer and more profitable to offer much higher returns to potential investors. That is very, very crucial. The level of access in sub-Saharan Africa stands at about 10%. This means that an average consumer stands at 90% chance to find an unclean cooking solution, that they stand to find cleaner options. This can be changed through more targeted incentives that shift market behavior. For example, targeted physical incentives such as exempting VAT on clean cooking fuel briquettes products to make them by far the cheapest option in the market, and excite consumers markets and offer tax holidays, especially for young people and other informal sector entrepreneurs who constitute up to 80% of Africa's labor, so that they can establish enterprises in clean cooking with minimal taxation expenses during formative years will go a long way in shifting markets towards cleaner solutions. And by this, justly transition communities to the low emissions pathway. This should become our own fierce agency of now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. You are certainly right that we have to look at development more broadly. But one of the things that I wanted to also ask you that within the conversation of a just transition in energy and all of that, a lot of the conversation has been around, the right to development, for African countries. How fair is it? And if we are to divest from fossil fuels when the continent, desperately needs it. So what is your view on that? I mean, climate justice, just transition. I mean, this is not a sense of the Paris Climate Agreement. So what are your views on it, especially for African countries, and also going into COP26? What should we be looking at?
Thank you very much. The reality is that energy is an enabler of development. It is not an end. It's a lifeblood in a system. And when you look at the African continent, context is very, very important. I've always argued that if we miss context, then we miss everything. 84% of people in the entire African continent live in rural areas and they do not have access to grid electricity. And using grid electricity to reach these people is impossible. It is not financially viable. And most of the people in the community are people who are actually dependent on the agro sector, but they lose up to 48 billion because they cannot add value to it. So in justly transitioning, we cannot just think about people having access to electricity, but having access to electricity that can help them add value. And in this case, we're talking about, can we be able to leverage on mini grid solar that can then be able to help mothers in villages add value? Can we decentralize simple climate action solutions of solar dryers that can help mothers in communities? And we are seeing this through the work that we're doing across the continent. But more importantly, we cannot talk just transition just from the perspective of energy access, as I've said, forgetting the youth. How do we transition in such a way that as we are doing so, opportunities are also created for youth? And we need to look at these accessible, simple solutions that can get into the informal sector, provided by these youth, but through the skills retooling, but help address the challenge of food insecurity. In that way, we will see mothers in communities putting more money in more pockets and food on the table. That is the best way. And if we lose that context, this debate might move on for quite a very long time.
Fantastic. You're very, very right. And thank you very, very much, Richard. Thank you.